Welcome from the National Foreign Language Center at the University of Maryland to our third day of panel discussions. I hope everyone's been enjoying them as much as I have. And we have another fantastic set of panelists here to discuss the tell domain of the learning experience. But before we get into the questioning and how this all works, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves first. So why don't we start with Trudy?
Hi, my name's Trudy Anderson, and I teach in the New Haven Public Schools. I teach Spanish, and I'm going to be starting my 29th year in teaching, and I'm originally from Jamaica.
Welcome. Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Dalton, and I teach in Lake Orion Community Schools at Scripps Middle School. This is my 25th year teaching, and this year I'm also serving as program chair for Central States Conference on Teaching Foreign Languages.
Welcome, Melissa. Ying?
Hi, my name is Ying, and I teach Mandarin Chinese in the heart of the Silicon Valley in Northern California. This is my, at loose count, I don't know, 20 plus years of teaching.
Hi, welcome you. And then our last panelist is Rosanne.
Hello, my name is Rosanne Zeppieri. I'm coming from New Jersey, and I was a teacher for many years. I'm like Jing, I lost count, or I stopped counting. And then I worked as the supervisor of instruction, and now I'm consulting. And I'm really pleased to be here today.
Yeah, what a well, I mean, so just the four of you probably bring us well over to 100 years of experience. So it's going to be a really interesting
You don't have to rub that in, Thomas.
Well, I didn't count mine, so. So our topic for this panel discussion is focused on the tell domain of the learning experience, which has an essential question of how do teachers facilitate meaningful learning experiences that advance language learning. We're going to begin with some general questions around this tell domain and some of the themes that have been brought up in the sessions. We have several presenters on this panel, and we invite the audience to listen and submit questions to the Q&A box in Zoom. If you see a question that's similar to yours or one that you have in mind, we would ask that you just click on the thumbs up, and then we'll see that that question is really popular and we would like to bring it into the conversation. The chat box in Zoom and on YouTube will not be monitored, but feel free to use it to share your comments and reactions to the conversation. We will do our best to bring your questions into discussion as time permits. So, are you guys ready to get started?
Yep.
Okay, I have our first question already, and that is, how can we ensure that our class content is relevant for our learners? And that was the question that we had planned on asking, but I'm going to make a last minute pivot just because of something that came up yesterday in the Sunset Chat when Greta and I were talking about a lot of the messages that came up throughout the day. And what if we replace that relevant with the word respectful? Because we talked a lot about respectful tasks, respectful to the learner. The idea of student-centered kept coming up. So maybe we can talk about both the relevant, but also respectful to the learners. And who would like to get us started?
Well, I'll give it a shot. So I was thinking about the middle schoolers who did their panel 2 days ago, and I was thinking how they really honed in on things that are very applicable to their lives and things that they could use the next day, perhaps. And so I think we really do need to spend a lot of time listening to them, especially at the beginning of the school year. We're going into a different type of a school year this year. And right at the very beginning, we have to hone in on learning who the students are in our classes. I have the luxury of teaching my students over 3 years, but the ones who are just coming in, I know very little about them. And the way I started the school year in the past few years, I can't start it that way because I don't know if we'll be going out again or what will happen. So I have to hone in on getting to know them so I know what's very interesting to them. So in it, how to adapt the curriculum to the things that they care about. And we can't divorce the things that are happening in the world around them and around us in the things that we're teaching. So we need to look at what they're experiencing and what we're experiencing right now and somehow mold that into the curriculum that we have to teach also.
Yeah. Can I piggyback off of that? We always start with an identity unit, I think, in the novice levels. In Michigan, I teach Spanish 1 and 2, and thinking about that start of the school year. For the last couple of years, I've done a curious names approach to it. And I think that that's really important when we think about respect, because back in the day, 25 years ago, you rolled out the list of popular Spanish names and everybody selected a name. And, the last couple of years has become a big center of awareness, like cultural appropriation. And do we assign them a name when it's not part of your culture? And, you have heritage language learners, So this year is going to be a whole new thing. Instead of talking about strange names that perhaps movie stars name their kids, really listening to them and seeing where they want to go with the identity unit. And kids have a lot of social consciousness. And I think, we should not sell them short at any level to the extent that they want to explore these topics.
Can I jump in from here? I want to build in based upon what Trudy and Melissa just shared. I think we definitely need to know our students. And on top of that, I think students need a personal connection to the material, whether it is through, engaging them emotionally or connecting the new information content with their prior knowledge. But I really want to challenge myself and challenge my colleagues. Can we invite our students into curriculum design? What I mean is, can we give them choices? What you guys want to learn, let's build it together. And I want to share with you, I teach high school. So I adopted a Google project. It's called 20%. Basically Google gives their employees options. 20% of your time you build on a project or product you're interested in. So I just borrow that idea and give my high school kids an option. Say, but I cannot give you 20% of my time. No, that's too much. I only give them 20 minutes per week, but I need them, of course, to identify the product they are going to deliver at the end, of the school year. It was amazing. And, a lot of kids just I learned from them. Basically, I just feel like I show respect to them, and they show to themselves, and they show respect to me. So this is our project. It's not teacher-centered, teacher-driven. It's more like we do it together.
Okay.
Thank you, Ying. If I could continue with that. I learned that several years ago in my last teaching job. I was in a specialized career academy. My classes were very diverse, and I had to adapt to it. Students were coming in from all over the county, and there were great differences in demographics. So I did just that. I always gave them choice with projects. I would give ideas, and then they could write me a little memo or email suggesting what they might like to do. This was high school as well, and also they could certainly investigate something different if they desired that. I would agree with you. They are so creative, and the projects were so much more, or the outcomes were so much more amazing and tailored to them, and they were just wonderful. And something that I always think about when I would be designing activities, and I used to tell the teachers that I supervised, I always think about Helena Curtin and Carol Ann Pesola's 3 dimensions of activities. When you're planning your activities, think about whether they are cognitively engaging, intrinsically interesting, and culturally connected. And that's something that we haven't talked about here, and I'm sure it'll come up in the other questions as well, is the cultural piece. How do we incorporate that? How do we start with the culture? culture as our background, and then paint products obviously on top of that culture.
And just how do we harness in, many of us, I teach in a city that has many students who are heritage language learners, and how they can help us in designing what we decide to teach. And like you said, Ying, you know, asking them what they would like to learn. For example, one of the initial units that we do is what we like to do with my very beginning students. And some of the things that the textbook might suggest as things that kids might like to do, my kids don't like to do. So we've got to find out what they like to do. So that's what they're going to learn, so that they can use what they have learned in our class.
I wonder if some of this heavy lifting with identity building can be done before the school year even starts, as rallying points to get them excited, like sending out surveys or discussion threads, Twitter buzz to get them fired up and get a beat on where their minds are at.
I think that might work well with high schools. Middle schools, we kind of sometimes discourage the use of social media with them, but I think even teachers can reach out to them to find out, whether through their emails, things like that, what they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, with already lots of ideas that I'm hearing, and we have our first question from the audience, and it's not a new question, it's one that we get, doesn't matter if it's pandemic or not, but so you talked about having different kind of learners, having heritage learners, and we all have different learners. And so the question of the audience is, how do we differentiate online lessons? And I know that's a mouthful, and we all have a very different idea of what differentiate means. And everybody has heard me talk knows I have a love-hate relationship with that word. But I do wonder what you guys are thinking, and what advice you might have for the summit participants.
Can I take that one?
Sure.
Okay. Well, middle school, we think about response to intervention. And when we first went online, it was a big push to try to meet everybody's needs. And I think of that bottom part of the pyramid in the design, scaffolding the lessons, especially in an asynchronous situation where you're providing almost like an IP every day, maybe in a form, something accessible to the students, and making sure that universal design principles are in place, and then adequate scaffolding, and almost initially building like clickbait, like on the, when you are looking at an app on your phone for the news, ads come up, having them click on things that are structures and then moving them towards production. And then, for some reason, a differentiation, when I think of that, I'm like, whoa, okay. More of like the 504 and the students who need serious accommodations, So for example, if you have an ASD student, taking what you really want them to take away from it and finding content that's accessible to them, but also almost creating a separate, as much work as it is, learning plan for that student so that they can feel like they're doing the same procedures as the class. So word recognition, main idea, things like that on interpretive, but at something that they can access, like a children's book, and reducing the number of questions and true and false and making it accessible to them.
And I think as world language teachers, especially for people who teach in the younger grades, some of the things that we do really does help across the spectrum of learners, whether it's putting in songs or putting in games or different hands-on activities for them to match things, that all of those things help the lower learners, and also for kids who might learn it even faster. And we can provide things, maybe the same topic, but different infographics on the same topic, or just, it's possible because we do that every day. So many things that we do different activities that grab different types of children or different types of learners.
Wow, great ideas. And I think, actually, I asked myself the same question when we started teaching remotely online. But I just told myself, back to the basic, because I think in my view, differentiation means that providing students with choices. And I want to focus on content process and product. How can I provide choices on those 3 areas? And luckily, I teach high school kids. And I think, emotionally and academically, they might be more ready to explore the content by themselves. So I think as teachers, we need to really identify the learning outcomes, the learning goals. This is our goal. And think about your students' skills or language skills and learning skills they have already acquired, and give them options. Say, for the content, I can say, this is the topic I want you to explore. And, go out and high school kids, you guys know how to use Google and go out and, do the search, go find the information, but come back and report to the whole class. It's actually a community sharing information. They are learning through this, content exploration process. And of course, for the product, I really tell them, what do you want? What do you want to do? It can be presentational writing, it can be presentational speaking, but definitely, I think, keep in mind, kids are they're so different. So as teachers, we are facilitators, just like Thomas.
Well, that's a mouthful. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, let me just jump into it because Rosanne, before you do that, because I think you can answer this next one, actually. I heard you guys talk about student choice when we talked about student relevancy. You guys mentioned some choice options even for the differentiation part. And so we have another question from the audience. And it's an interesting one because they're saying that incorporating student choice is not really a new thing, right? So now in this online environment, how often should students have choice in curriculum and lesson and units? Because I think a lot of teachers do feel like more constrained by perhaps whatever LMS they happen to be using, whatever they're set up in their school is. So how often and how do you give kids choice in this new environment where perhaps you're not teaching in the classroom?
I think choice in the product that they do. So I think if you're doing live classes or recorded classes, that you might be teaching one area, but the things that you want them to do with what they've learned, you could say, just like Ying was saying, do you want to do a presentation? I used to have a child who was the top person in my class, but if she ever had to do a presentation, she would cry. Why force her to do that? She would write, she will easily write what she said, she would have said. So giving them the choice of the product and the outcomes that they have, you set the goal that this is what I want to see. And as long as you can figure out a way for me to see that, then it's okay.
Can I jump in here a little bit? I agree thoroughly. I also think that you all hit on something that's so critical, is to ensure that students understand what they're going to be able to do with language by the end of the learning experience. We're teaching in another language for most of the kids. And, a lot of times they're hearing just noises. So we want to make those noises be meaningful. And presenting and talking about, not just reading the learning outcomes, the can-dos to the class, but explaining what they mean and what they'll be able to do will go a long way in helping the kids learn what we want them to learn. I just wanted to share something that I learned years ago in district about differentiation that I found powerful. Think about 3 bunches in your classroom: the students who are ready to learn with you, and hopefully that's the majority. The students who need more scaffolding, they're just not quite there yet. Maybe they can't manipulate the language yet, or they haven't learned enough vocabulary, or they need more help. And then the third group, the high flyers, who really, we need to consider them. What can we do to make it interesting? So everybody has the same outcomes. It's just how we adapt. So if we plan for the middle group, the students who are ready for us to teach them, and then put in additional scaffolds for the kids that are struggling, and think about a more complicated process for the high flyers. I don't know if that helps you, but it certainly helped the teacher, and it helped the teachers that I supervised as well. It makes it more doable. And anyways, I think it was, for me, it was a very helpful procedure or strategy.
So Roseanne, I can see how that could be helpful, but I wonder now in this new environment, that large group is not there either, right? They're also all perhaps in 20 different homes, joining us from 20 different devices at 20 different times. So I wonder how the new reality kind of impact that view on differentiation and choice.
Well, I think you're right, but we can still provide scaffolds. We can still provide more complicated options, and we can ask the students to choose. I think oftentimes we're afraid the students are going to the lowest common denominator, but I think we underestimate them. If we give them a challenge, if we give them something that is interesting to them, as everyone said, that's relevant to their lives, that they really want to explore, they're more apt to move along and choose an appropriate pathway to meet the objectives. They really are. I mean, even young kids do that. I supervised an elementary and middle school program, and I saw that in action, and I found it very intriguing. Two things that I noticed. One, the kids were pleased that they were successful. So the kids with the scaffolding felt honored and were happy that they could complete the tasks appropriately. The kids that might have been very bored and just started misbehaving, which is what they do in elementary. They start hitting one another, or they just start reading a book. It's amazing. They don't hide their emotions. And if they had something that challenged them, that was interesting, a little more complicated, that they would run with it as well. So you're right, Thomas, but at the same time, I think we have to have that ready when we're planning our units.
And it's something
I think,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I just wanted to say that I think that choice boards help. Sometimes you can give a top 10. This is what they called it, this group that came in to do the professional development. So it's really the same idea. They can choose their activities or learning tasks. I'd rather think of them as learning tasks, and choose X number. And they go in order, of simplest to most complex, and they can choose from them. So this respects them. It gives them, choice. And I think the hardest part of all of this for those of us who are a little bit older is, do we understand their culture, their lives? I always think of a good friend of mine who retired, and I was kind of surprised when she retired. And she said her reason for retiring, her impetus was that she no longer felt connected to her students' culture. And so that made her teaching stale, which, was something for me to think about.
Wow.
So you mentioned choice board, and that brings actually up one of our next questions as a strategy. But how do we scaffold learning experiences so that students are able to grow their proficiency in whatever environment that we're teaching? So what are some of the other strategies for scaffolding that you guys would recommend?
May I jump in first?
Okay.
I actually think technology tools can play an important role in this when we teach online. And I think usually if I want to introduce a new content, and I like to add a brainstorming, step, I use either Padlet or Google Jamboard, any technology tool. And ask my students to share. I give them the topic. This is the new unit we're going to do. So share words or ideas or anything you think is related to this new topic. And you're going to see a lot of words popped up. I think it's a good opportunity for kids who have already learned something to share what they have already acquired. And for kids who might, I forgot that word, but this is the opportunity for them to catch up a little bit. And also another strategy I use a lot is I tell my students, focus on what you know. If I give them a article to read, authentic material, they might be just, whoa, what are these? So many words, I don't know.
It's words. Yeah.
Right? So my step one is usually highlight, underline, or highlight the words you know, and then share with a partner. You know, maybe you're going to find more words, and then share in your group. So I think that will really ease their, anxiety level and give me a, good start in this unit.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
I'll jump
Please
in
go ahead.
with middle schoolers. The things that I know that work well is using pictures and actions and games and all those things for input. And you're using all those words that they start hearing. And then you can start giving them the sentence frames and sentence starters to help them start learning how to do this, and then gradually start taking it away as the unit progresses, and keep encouraging them to use the target language, because now you know how to say that. And it's all, there's some sentence frames that when we're working on something, I'll always have it on the board so they can always look up and see it so that they can keep talking or they can write. So just being very mindful of, especially at the very beginning, giving them as much input with vocabulary as possible. They might never learn all the words that you'd think, but they're getting an idea of what's being expected of them.
Another thing too with middle school, is it okay to jump in? When we made the switch to online, a lot of the basis of helping the kids understand where you're going with the scaffolding in my classroom was related to having solid presentations every day, PowerPoints, lots of images, lots of directions, even though maybe the class was going on in the target language instruction that they could follow with a clear agenda. And when we went online, a lot of teachers said, oh, I'm looking at black circles where the kids aren't there and they're covered in a blanket and this and that. And what we found was when you carry over a lot of the visual elements and you provide them with what they need. So if you want a particular structure to get to your end result, you make the end result clear to the kids, say, hey kids, at the end of this, we're going to create this and this and this. And along the way, have them see those very explicitly on the screen with images that they could clearly access. And another factor too with scaffolding is a lot of them are not ready to speak. And so therefore, you can use a lot of the tools perhaps on Zoom where you have thumbs up, thumbs down means this and this and this, and you have them reacting using those tools. I think teachers have become very adaptable at trying to reach the kids and get them engaged without making the product be spoken, but in that speaking environment. And then they learn to trust you. They know you're not going to put them out there or embarrass them. I think that's the biggest fear with middle school kids.
Good point.
So can you have on Google Classroom, so I'm out of my depth a little bit here because I haven't taught using Google Classroom, but I've seen it in action many times. And it seems to me that you could set up a resource page where you have some scaffolded activities, and you might have some like a Kahoot game so they could practice their vocabulary, or Padlet where they can, upload some things as you were saying. And then they could refer back to that. For some kids, now a good friend of mine's grandson is very happy with remote learning because he can take his time, he can go back and he can watch the teacher's presentation again, and he can access the resources that are there. And this has helped him. In fact, his mother has requested that he stay home for the first semester, this coming school year, because it has worked for him. He has his outside activities, so he's not just a loner. But so I think we have to think about that. Those resources, all that scaffolding can be there for them, right? And they can add to it, I believe. So help me. Am I totally off base with Google Classroom?
No. For mine, I used to, as I taught a topic, I would find videos on the internet and post it on my Google Classroom for my students to go back and look. But one thing that I found which was interesting during this online learning, I started doing that in the first 3 weeks when they sent us home with no plan. And I started posting those videos there and saying, but what surprised me was after the third week when I decided to make my own videos and post them on Google Classroom, my students reacted to that a lot better. And it was interesting. The person was teaching in English, but when I did mine, I did it in Spanish. And one child emailed me and says, wow, it's so much better when you do it, because they knew what to expect, that even though it was a challenge, they were going to listen to it in Spanish. It was what they were secure with, what they were used to, and they were able to do it. So it's a good tool to use. And maybe it's something we should consider from now on, to post a video of what we've done, because for students like that one, they can always go back and look to help them do their work, and provide a resource page where you have those sentence frames and everything that they could always go there and see it.
The video feedback and Flipgrid's really nice too, because then they have that personal touch. There's just so much we can do.
Yeah. They can comment on each other's videos. I usually made one of myself doing it, so they know what it would look like.
Oh, good.
So there wasn't any surprise. They knew what to expect.
Yep.
So you guys have highlighted really maybe even some of the potential benefits of moving to an online environment. I think the story that Rosanne that you shared, it's a powerful one, because in the real classroom, once it's over and it's gone. And for those students who don't, that's how they often feel, right? Oh, I didn't get it. And if you have that experience in language class, probably more than a couple of times, then those students give up on learning a language, and they run away thinking, oh, I can't learn this language. And perhaps this is our chance to kind of change some of these mindsets, because we can provide better support for those students. But
I think we're fortunate to have those online resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll move us to our next question, because it's one that has come up in some of the conversations, the other panels, as well in some of the Twitter conversations. And I'm really excited because we've got some people that experience in the lower grades, even though it applies to all grades. And this is the main question really is about how do we create learning experience that require critical thinking. But I want us to kind of talk about this in the idea of how can we get kids who have perhaps are novice level language learners to do critical thinking tasks that are still at the novice level, because often teachers think it can be done, and that's why there's perhaps switch to English during cultural tasks, or we stay at those low level non-critical thinking tasks because we're using their language ability as an excuse. So what do you guys have, what kind of ideas do you have about how do you do critical thinking, and specifically how you do with younger learners or with learners at the novice level? I see a lot of head shaking. You guys have ideas.
Okay. Can I start here, maybe?
Go ahead.
Is that all right? Okay. So here's the thing. Kids come to school thinking critically. We all, if you've had children, you see them solve problems when they're infants. They'll start to walk sometimes or crawl if you hold out something desirable that they want and you don't give it to them. You'll notice that they'll pull over a chair to the counter to get something that they can't reach. I mean, they're always thinking critically. We just need to support it. Can we teach it? I don't know, but we can support it by showing them what it means in the classroom. The teacher can model critical thinking as he or she is doing a think aloud, for example. Now, how am I going to do this activity? What do I think? Let me ask some questions. I'm making this up. I'm sorry. Why do I think this might be correct? Or why would I do it this way? Anybody have any ideas? And you bring the kids into the process. Now, this is tough at a low level. I'm not going to deny that when kids don't have a ton of language, but teachers amazingly make themselves comprehensible. It always amazes me when I watch them. And in particular, I might say elementary teachers and middle school teachers, because they have absolutely no choice. And they use so many different strategies. As you were saying, Trudy, they're using visuals and motions and sounds and everything else, and they make themselves understandable. I think the whole idea is to remember that we can't stop at just the basic, answer that a student might give, but that we challenge them a little bit, even younger kids, saying, can you tell me a little bit more? Or can you give me an example? They can sometimes give examples. They can tell you a little bit more. Just follow up one question with a second question. And I think just that one strategy will be really helpful. And also think about the questions that you ask. I read something that said that teachers ask upwards of 400 questions a day. Think about that. And so many of them are lower level, and some of them are going to be, that's fine. But script some questions around your lessons so that you know that you're hitting higher levels, even with the younger kids. I'm not sure that answered your question, Thomas.
May I share what I did with my Chinese 1 novice, really true novice kids? And I really agree what Rosanne was just saying. If we want our kids to have this critical thinking, mindset, we teachers need to have it first, and we have to model it. And I think it's 21st century skill, not, for the kids, also for us. So for my Chinese 1, this last year, I just introduced my nationality chapter. I think we all do that. Which country are you from? I'm American, I'm Chinese. So this time I tried a different approach. Say, in the past, I just showed my kids like I don't know what's the word, typical American, typical Chinese. I thought was typical, the picture, and asked them to, practice the words. But this year I showed different pictures. For instance, as you know, the mayor of London is actually from an immigrant family. Mm-hmm. So I showed this picture after we learned all these countries, and I said, which country is he from? And also I find it out in northeast of India, you will find people who just look like me. They're Indians, but they just look like me. So I also put that up, which country are they from? I think maybe their language level is not there to explain in details, but at least I think just from this interaction, this activity, I want to trigger their critical thinking. And my last activity is please draw the image of American. So I want to tell them it's not one face. We are one community. We might look different, but we are all Americans. That's the message. That's the critical thinking piece I want to put in my novice kids' mind.
Nice. Can I jump in? Yeah. I think this is a topic it's really difficult for me in some ways because, again, with the novice students, you're wondering how much language do they have to discuss these things? And I want to discuss that with them. And this 2 weeks ago, I went to the NEL, or I participated in the NEL conference. And one of the women presenters, she challenged us to start thinking globally with our students, to use more than just local things, or for novice speakers, it's very self-centered. The curriculum really is very self-centered, but how to use a more global way of looking at our classes and using different essential questions in our curriculum to hone in on our students thinking more about their communities and their world. And I that was the one thing that stuck with me, and I was just thinking that we need to give them the vocabulary for that. And it could be for my kids, it would be simple vocabulary. For example, one of the things we do in the education unit is, what do schools look like around the world? And my question to them to start off the lesson was, what makes a school? What do you need to make a school? And they came up with a whole bunch of things at the very beginning of what makes a school. And then you looked at schools all over the world. Somewhere they had everything you could possibly need in a school, and somewhere they were outside sitting under a tree with a teacher, their notebooks, and the students. And finally, I gave them the sentence frame of, in a school you need. And after looking at all the pictures that we saw, they were able to come up with, in a school you need a teacher, and students. That's all that you need to make a school. But I had to give them the pictures, time to say, well, do they have this? Do they have that? Do they have that? Well, is it a school? What if the school was on a boat? They never thought of a school on a boat, and why that would be. So we really do have to give them the sentence frames that, even though they might not be able to talk about it on a very in-depth level because they're novice students, because that's who I have, but they were able to come to the conclusion that I was hoping they would come to. And they came to it, and I gave them the sentence that they could finish making that conclusion. So to me, it's a really hard thing, because I want to be able to discuss things in the language with them, but sometimes they don't have that vocabulary, and they might not be able to do it at the level that I would love to do it, but it doesn't mean they can't get there.
I really like the idea of giving them that global perspective. And I think that's so oftentimes missed in the novice levels, and just getting them to the perspective level. So when you have the rubric in front of you for cultures, you're going beyond products and practices. You're getting them to be able to see the world from somebody else's view, and that personal touch, like finding something that impacts them personally. Like, for example, in a water scarcity unit in Michigan, we're surrounded by the Great Lakes, and it's a reality that the kids have. And Nestle pumps out gallons and gallons of water from one of our greatest aquifers in Michigan, and kids know about this current event. Taking that and turning the page and finding an authentic resource where it talks about the Pacto de Agua, the water pact in the Colorado region, it's mind-blowing for them that the Colorado River runs into Mexico, and that the U.S. maintains a treaty with Mexico, and during times of drought, there's give and take with this water, and they don't see it from that way. And you could take a very sophisticated news story that maybe they understand 40%, if that, but you ask them the questions that say, hey, what's this river? Is it this or this? Is it the Colorado or is it the Mississippi? They can answer that. It's right there on the screen. They feel good. Great. We're getting into a really hot and heavy issue that has a lot of social justice implications, a lot of globalism, but we're asking them to do it at an attainable way that they can reach it. And then if you have your final product be, like a choice board would be great. Didn't think of that, but do a debate with the class, they interact, and then have them do a PSA for the Great Lakes, whether or not it should be shared. Everyone has an opinion. They either are for it or they're against it. And, you're having them really make this personalized with their production of language.
Oh, what great examples. And you guys are, you're already giving each other's ideas of how to change that, which is fantastic. What a great outcome with this panel. So as we were almost running out of time, believe it or not, it goes by really fast. The last question deals with promoting learner engagement. But I'm wondering if there's any wisdom that you have, anything that you saw in the sessions that we premiered in this block, or even perhaps from your own session, anything that you can share that really gives our audience some more ideas about how can we promote learner engagement in a classroom or in an online environment.
I think this whole online learning thing has taught me that I need to get to know my students and get to know them very well at the very beginning, because I found that across the board, because in our school we checked when kids were doing work and for what teachers, that if they liked the teacher or felt that they had a good relationship with the teacher, they were more likely to do the work during the online time. So I'm very mindful of getting to know the students. And as we talked about before, trying to find things that are relevant for them and that they want to do. I think that helps with engagement. I had to laugh because during online learning, there's one student who did not engage at all. I didn't think she was even looking at what we were doing. And I happened to do something about visiting the Madrid Zoo. And she had done zero work all along. And that week she did it. And she emailed me and said, oh, I just feel like going to the zoo. That was so good. LOL, Mrs. Anderson. And I'm thinking, nothing else that I did for the entire time was interesting to her, but this one thing was the one thing that she cared about. So we really do need to be mindful of doing things that would be interesting to a lot of students.
Thank you, Trudy. I love that example.
I know, I love that.
And I want to say, I really like what Trudy just mentioned. We need to know our students. And I think at the same time, we want our students to know us. So I think that can be done through interpersonal activities. Definitely, that's the very natural way getting to know each other. And I have a recorded session scheduled for, I know California time is 12 o'clock. Yeah,
3 o'clock our time.
3 o'clock.
Yeah, and I do want to share some interpersonal strategies I have been using in my classroom, and I really want to get the opportunity listening from the audience, from all my fellow teacher friends. Let's get the interpersonal heart-to-heart conversation going. Let's build the community. This is step one. Let's start from here, build our community.
I love what you said about them getting to know you, because that's one of the first things I do. I show them pictures of my son and my husband, and so they feel like they know you. And when they tell you something, oh, I have a baseball game this weekend, follow up with them because they think you're interested in them, and then they will start doing, and it's possible even novice levels to talk about those things. You could say, did you win? Did you lose? And you'd be saying it in the target language, but they know a thumbs up, thumbs down, they'll figure it out. So those kinds of things really do help to grab them so that you can pull them along to do what you would like to do also.
I think it's too important that they also really know the real you. Like this experience with COVID has really made it a situation where we've had to adapt to a lot of uncertainty. And I think actually the less appealing parts of it, where things have been a little quirky, like with the Zoom meetings, and when they see a little bit of your fragility and you're like, like you struggling as a person, and they see your weaknesses, like the Brene Brown thing, like that actually makes them feel a little bit sorry for you. We had a situation where they see you're human, and my dad was burned very severely in May, and I had to drop everything. And I actually gave one of my classes from a dairy petting zoo. And walked from animal to animal in Spanish, narrating, because it was the only place that had reliable Wi-Fi. And I had more kids in class because they didn't know where the roving reporter was going to be in the midst of this. And my hair is all like this, and like that gets kids to want to tune in. They don't want to see perfect. You got to give up some control a little bit.
Yeah, that's so true.
I'd just like to share one thing that I noticed as a supervisor. One of the most effective teachers that I supervised, and he was good instructionally, don't get me wrong, but his main feature was how he set that sense of community in his classroom. And he did it very naturally, and he got to know the kids. Even if he knew one thing about them, he was a baseball fanatic. So with the baseball fanatics in his class, he always had a little word about maybe the team that they liked, or did they win? Did they lose? Did they watch it? With kids who were, involved with chorus, he had something to say. And it would be very natural. As they walked in the room, he'd just make a little comment, or when he was going around, maybe checking in homework, it was like a microsecond, but that made such a difference in the atmosphere in the room and the kids' engagement. They wanted to learn from him. It was a wonderful thing to see. That's all I can say. I wish I had had that skill. I think he did it better than anyone I've ever seen. So we can't downplay the personalization and getting to know our kids. It's critical.
Yeah.
Well, I think you guys have hit on many of the themes that keep coming back throughout the summit. Certainly the getting to know your students and even what Melissa talked about, being your real self, and maybe not the teacher self that we have so finely curated for so many years. Are certainly topics that keep coming up, and so I hope that our audience found that really helpful. I want to thank you, Trudy. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Rosanne. Thank you, Ying, for spending an hour with us and sharing some of the ideas during this panel discussion.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for the
My
opportunity.
pleasure.
Thank you, guys.
Join my
Right,
panel.
thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I learned a lot. Thank you.
Bye-bye.